I was heading home when I got to thinking, and I was worried I hadn't really done enough investigation for you, since I got so freaked out by the basement and all. And then I remembered that I'd seen quite a lot of spider webs in the brief time I was down there, and maybe I should check it out again. I mean, like I said, I'm not really afraid of spiders, so I went back for another look. It was dark when I got to Boothby Road, but I saw that the basement window was still open. I'd made sure to bring a torch this time, and after a quick check to make sure nobody was watching, I climbed inside. I knew right then that I'd made a huge mistake. The air was just as musty as it had been before, but it seemed warmer than it had been, which was strange, because outside it was a cold February night. I turned on my torch and shone it around, but was disappointed to see that all those spider webs that I remembered seemed old and unremarkable. If there were spiders there, none were easily seen, and for a second I thought that the only interesting part of my return trip was that it would land me in prison if I wasn't careful. Then I heard movement from the other side of the basement. It was faint, just a rustling, really. I didn't want to check it out, I really didn't. I've catalogued and looked into enough of these cases to know that following the noise is always a really, really bad idea. But, I mean, it's my job, isn't it? So I slowly moved towards it, keeping my torch held in front of me like a shield. The beam was so much weaker than I had thought it was, and it only lit up the stark outlines of the shelves and detritus that littered the basement. The movement had stopped, or at least I couldn't hear it anymore, and I'd almost made up my mind to just turn around and leave when my torch fell across what looked like a human figure. It appeared to be a woman. She was facing away from me, apparently staring at the corner of the wall. Her hair was long and black. Though it was so twisted and dirty, it was hard to tell if that was its original colour. She wore a threadbare grey overcoat, though beneath it her legs were bare and covered with what I at first thought were spots. In her right hand she held a stained green handkerchief. She stood there, totally still, either not noticing the torchlight that was shining on her or not caring. I didn't move a muscle. And with a quick, jerky movement, she brought the handkerchief to her face and coughed. I mean, I call it a cough because that's what it looked like, but it didn't sound like a cough. It was more like you know in a nature documentary, when the lion's caught something and it's ripping it apart, that noise of wet meat. Yeah, it was like that. I saw something drop from the handkerchief onto the floor. It was about an inch long, silver, and it wriggled as it fell. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it, though looking back I really wish I hadn't. Her head snapped towards me and she locked eyes with me. Her pupils seemed ragged and collapsed, and when she smiled her teeth were chipped and blackened. I started to stagger backwards, expecting at any moment for her to lunge at me, but instead she slowly reached up and let the overcoat fall to the floor. Her skin was pale, almost grey and full of... Sorry, it still makes me sick to think about it. It was full of holes, deep black holes, just honeycombing every bit of flesh like a wasp's nest. I could see those thin silver worms crawling in and out and their black tips twitching as they squirmed through that pitted meat. I mean, it wasn't human. It can't have been. It took a step towards me, and as it did so, the worms began to writhe out of every hole and cavity, falling to the floor in a cascading wave and starting to crawl towards me with alarming speed. I had the oddest thought then, and even as I backed away towards the stairs, I started to get my phone out. The daft thing is, I wasn't even going to call anyone for help. I just wanted to take a picture of the thing, to prove to you that it happened. You're always so quick to dismiss these statements, and I wanted proof for you. Except, well, I managed to drop it, of course. Just as I was bringing up the camera app, one of the worm things reached at me and leapt at my face. That thing jumped literally 6 feet through the air at my face. It missed me, but I was so taken aback that I fell onto the stairs behind me and dropped my phone to the ground. I didn't stop to pick it up. I just fled up the stairs as fast as I could. Obviously, the door at the top wasn't locked. If it had been, I'm sure I'd be dead. Or worse. I don't know how long I slept for, but it was still dark when the knocking woke me up. Don't know if it was the same night or if I'd slept right through the day. Either way, I dragged myself up, and as I sat there, it all came back to me, what I'd seen, and I shuddered. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd overreacted to finding a homeless woman sleeping in the basement. Maybe she was sick and needed an ambulance. God, maybe I'd left her to die. There was more knocking, and I reached up to flick the light on. But when I did so, nothing happened. I tried the lamp next to my bed, but again, nothing. Looking round, I saw that none of my electronics seemed to be on. There must have been some sort of power cut. Again, someone knocked at the door. Maybe it was one of my neighbours coming to check whether I'd lost the power. So I shuffled over towards the door and reached for the handle. As I was about to open it, I got a sudden chill and stopped. What if she was outside, waiting? I mean, the worms that made a hive of her body, eager, striving to make me one as well. I thought of that awful case you had us looking into where that woman burst into worms, and I realised that this woman must be that Jane Prentiss you were telling us about. I never had one of those peepholes added, so I couldn't see what was out there. But as I took a step back, I saw something on the floor, crawling out from underneath the door. It was a small, silver-looking worm. I think I might have lost my mind a bit then. It all feels very strange, blurry. I remember stamping and stamping as more made their way under my doorway. I remember grabbing every towel, sock, bit of fabric, scrap that I could find, stuffing them under the door, into the cracks around the window, anything where a slender worm might crawl, I made airtight. And then I sat there and waited. I still had no power, no phone, no way to communicate with the outside. This went on for 13 days. Every time I thought it might be safe to try and leave, I'd hear that knocking at my door come back. Luckily, there was no problem with my water supply, so I had plenty to drink. I'm just glad none of them thought to come up through the pipes. I eat a lot of ready meals, cans, that kind of thing, so I had food, although after the first few days I had to start rationing. If I ever see another can of peaches. Ugh. But I think the worst part was the boredom. No internet, no phone, no power. I read the handful of print books I owned several times. I didn't really sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd start to feel something was crawling up my legs, and I'd have to sit up and check. Other times I'd be awoken by that knocking. I spent a lot of time trying to remember what you told me about Jane Prentiss when we were working on Tim Hodges' statement, but all I remembered was that she called herself to be a practicing witch and believed to be infected by a dangerous, unknown parasite. She never talked to me. I could have heard her clearly through the door, but she never made a sound apart from that knocking. From what I saw, maybe what was in her throat didn't leave room for a voice. Strangely, she never tried to break down my door either. She just knocked. She knocked and knocked and knocked. Finally, I woke up this morning and she was gone. I don't know exactly how I knew. I think she brought that musty smell with her, and this morning I couldn't smell it. And there was no knocking. I mean, it still took me about 4 hours of checking and double-checking and listening at the letterbox before I got the nerve to actually open the door. But when I did, there was no one there. And I ran all the way here.